The morning Liar decided to leave, the town was still wrapped in the kind of silence that happens only before sunrise. The streets smelled faintly of yesterday's rain, and the sea, visible beyond the rooftops, shifted in slow silver waves. He had been thinking about this journey for months, maybe years, ever since his father had told him, "There's a mountain, far from here, where the first light of the world touches the earth. If you ever stand there at dawn, you'll see more than just the sun." Liar had never asked what his father meant. He knew that if he did, the mystery would lose something. Some things are meant to be discovered only on the road. His pack was light, a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, a tin flask of water, a folded map drawn by a neighbor who claimed he'd once traveled close enough to see the mountain's shadow, and a worn journal. He didn't know yet what he would write in it, but he liked the idea of filling it with fragments of the road. As he stepped onto the empty main street, the shutters of the bakery creaked open. Old Mara, who had baked bread for as long as he could remember, leaned out. "Off somewhere, are you?" she called, her voice carrying through the still air. "To see the dawn," he replied, as if it explained everything. Mara studied him for a moment, then tossed him a small paper bag. "Sweet rolls. You'll need them more than I do." The road out of town sloped gently upward, bordered by stone walls covered in wild ivy. The further he walked, the more the smell of the sea faded, replaced by the damp scent of soil. By mid-morning, the sun had risen fully, and the horizon was a hazy gold. Around noon, he reached a small pier jutting into a wide river. A man sat there, his fishing line dangling into the still water. He didn't turn when Liar approached, but spoke as if he'd been expecting company. "You headed somewhere, boy?" "To the mountain. To see the first light," Liar said. The man reeled in his line slowly, revealing a single small fish, which he slipped back into the water without a second glance. "I used to fish for hours," he said, "thinking that the day I caught the biggest fish would be the day I'd be happy. Years passed. I caught many fish, some big, some small, and I realized it wasn't the fish I remembered. It was mornings like this, quiet, with the mist still over the water, and my son sitting next to me asking questions I didn't know the answers to." Liar stayed for a while, listening. The fisherman spoke not with regret, but with a kind of gentle certainty that made Liar feel the road ahead was already teaching him something. When Liar finally moved on, the sky had begun to shift again, clouds gathering, wind picking up. The road forked. One path led across a wooden bridge into a valley, the other climbed toward low hills. He chose the hills. The air smelled faintly of pine. By evening, he reached a ridge where he could see far across the land, rolling fields, scattered villages, and in the very distance, just barely visible through the haze, a faint outline. A shape that could be the mountain. Liar sat there as the first stars appeared, his sweet rolls long gone, and wrote a single sentence in his journal: "The dawn may be far, but it's already begun." The wind that night was restless, carrying scents from far-off places, smoke from some unseen hearth, a trace of rain yet to fall. Liar woke early, his blanket damp with dew, and set off before the first light touched the hills. The path curved down into a broad valley where the grass shimmered silver in the morning frost. He walked until the valley narrowed into a cobblestone street lined with shuttered windows. The only sound was a faint, uneven melody drifting from an open doorway. Curious, Liar stepped inside and found a man sitting on a low stool, holding a guitar with no strings. His fingers moved over the empty frame as if plucking invisible notes. The man looked up, eyes bright. "Did you hear it?" Liar hesitated. "I think so." "Good," the man said, setting the guitar across his lap. "Most people just hear silence." Over a cup of something warm and bitter, the man told his story. He had once been a traveling musician, playing in markets and town squares. Then, years ago, an accident at a building site crushed his hands. The bones had healed crooked, the fingers could no longer hold a chord. For a long time, he couldn't bear to touch the guitar. But one evening, sitting alone, he realized he could still hear the music in his mind, clear and whole. So he began to play again, not for others, but for himself. "I thought music was something you gave to people," he said, "but I've learned it's something you carry, whether or not anyone hears it." When Liar left, the man pressed a folded scrap of paper into his palm. Inside was a single line, written in uneven ink: "Carry what you love, even when it changes shape." The road out of the valley climbed sharply. Around midday, the sky darkened, and rain began in thin, slanting lines. Liar pulled his hood tight and kept moving until he spotted a small wayside shelter. Under its roof sat a woman arranging saplings in burlap sacks. She smiled without looking up. "You'll be soaked through if you keep going in this weather." "I'm headed for the mountain," Liar said, shaking water from his sleeves. The woman gestured to the rows of young trees. "These will be shade in 50 years, fruit in 60. I'll be gone by then, but someone will sit under them." They spoke until the rain eased. Liar realized that in 2 days on the road, he had learned more from strangers than in years at home. The fisherman had taught him about moments over milestones, the musician about holding on to what endures within you, the woman about planting without seeing the harvest. By dusk, he found himself on a ridge again, the faint outline of the mountain just a shade clearer than before. He opened his journal and wrote 3 lines. "Some mornings are worth more than the catch. What you love can survive without form. Plant even if you won't see the shade." Closing the book, he felt as though the pieces of something, he didn't yet know what, were quietly beginning to fit together. The next morning broke clear and bright, the kind of sky that made the world seem wider. Liar followed a winding dirt road, passing stone farmhouses with smoke curling from their chimneys. At a crossroads, he saw a colorful wagon parked beneath a leaning elm tree. Its wheels were painted red and blue, and from the side hung small trinkets, wooden carvings, bits of ribbon, glass beads that caught the light. A man with a weathered face sat on the wagon step, polishing a brass compass. He looked up and grinned. "Traveler, you look like someone in need of something he doesn't know he needs." Liar smiled faintly. "I'm just passing through." "All the better," the merchant replied, gesturing to his wares. "I used to sell grand things, bolts of silk, jars of spice, silver pendants. But somewhere along the way, I realized the most valuable things I ever traded weren't in the cart. They were in people's faces when they spoke of what they dreamed to do. I sold dreams once, you know, convinced people to chase them, sometimes even helped them pack." He paused, running a thumb along the compass lid. "Then I forgot my own." Now he traveled not to sell, but to listen. People came to his wagon, told him of something they'd lost, a hope, a habit, a belief, and he tried to give them a token to remind them it was still theirs to reclaim. For one woman, it was a seashell; for a boy, a worn chess piece; for a farmer, a smooth river stone. From a small box, he took out a square of faded cloth and handed it to Liar. A reminder that even if the road frays, it still leads somewhere. Keep it until it tells you to let it go. Liar thanked him and moved on. The cloth was nothing remarkable, but he kept touching it in his pocket as he walked, as though it might anchor him to something he didn't yet understand. By midday, the road dipped into a narrow pass where steep rock walls rose on both sides. The air grew cooler, shadows lengthening even though it was far from evening. Rounding a bend, Liar spotted a boy of about 12, crouched by the roadside, stacking small stones into towers. "Are you building something?" Liar asked. "Markers," the boy replied without looking up. "For travelers. My father says most people don't notice the path changing until they're lost. These towers help them find the way back." They worked together for a while, balancing stones until each pile stood steady. Liar thought about the fisherman, the musician, the tree planter, the merchant, and now this boy, quietly making the road kinder for strangers. When he left the pass, the land opened into rolling meadows dotted with wildflowers. The wind tugged at his coat, and he could see, far in the distance, the mountain silhouette, sharper now but still far off. That night, by a small fire, Liar laid out the tokens he carried: the fisherman's words in memory, the musician's paper scrap, the woman's quiet conviction, the merchant's cloth, the boy's stone tower fresh in his mind. They didn't seem connected, but there was an odd comfort in having them, like scattered stars whose constellation he hadn't yet traced. In his journal he wrote, "Some people wait for the dawn. Others plant it, piece by piece, in the dark." Liar awoke to a morning of soft mist clinging to the grass. The world felt muted, as if the day itself was hesitant to begin. He followed the main track east, the sound of his footsteps swallowed quickly by the fog. By late morning, the haze thinned enough to reveal a cluster of buildings, not quite a village, more like a scattering of houses. At the edge stood a tall, weathered structure with its doors wide open. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. A woman emerged from one of the upper rooms, her sleeves rolled, carrying a bucket. She paused when she saw Liar. "You're not from here." "Just passing through," he said. "Is this an inn?" "Not anymore," she replied. "It used to be. My parents ran it until the road changed and travelers stopped coming. Now it's just me and the rooms." She led him through the hallways, each room swept and tidy but entirely empty. No beds, no furniture, only sunlight spilling through bare windows. "I keep them ready," she said, "even though no one stays. I suppose it's foolish. But my father used to say that an empty room is a promise. It means someone could come." They sat in what had once been the dining room, drinking tea brewed from dried leaves she kept in a jar. She spoke about the travelers she remembered as a child, the way each one brought something into the house, a story, a laugh, a strange smell from a far-off city. "You never know which visitor will change your life," she said. "So you keep the doors open." When Liar left, she handed him a small brass key. "It doesn't open anything anymore," she said with a faint smile, "but maybe it will remind you to keep space for the unexpected." The road after the inn wound through a stretch of high grass, swaying in the wind like waves. Liar walked for hours, until his legs ached, then came upon a stream so clear he could see each stone on its bed. Kneeling to drink, he noticed an old man sitting nearby, sketching the water in a notebook. The man's lines were quick but careful. "The stream's been here longer than the village," he said without looking up. "It's not rushing anywhere, but it's never still. Reminds me of people, always changing, even when they stay in one place." They spoke briefly, and when Liar rose to leave, the man gave him a torn page from his notebook, a charcoal drawing of the stream. "Sometimes," the old man said, "you need to see what's right in front of you from someone else's hand." That evening, Liar camped at the edge of a pine grove. His collection of tokens was growing: a scrap of paper, a piece of cloth, a brass key, a drawing. They were small, almost insignificant objects, yet they carried weight. He arranged them beside the fire and realized each one represented something he'd been given that couldn't be bought. As night settled, the mountain stood dark against the stars, closer than it had ever been. He traced its outline with his eyes until he drifted into sleep, the sound of the wind in the pines like the whisper of a story still being told. The air grew thinner as Liar moved into higher ground. Paths narrowed into trails, the grass giving way to rock and hardy shrubs. The mountain now loomed like a great shadow that shifted with the sun. By midday, the trail led him to a bridge suspended over a narrow gorge. The wood planks creaked underfoot, the river far below roaring in a white rush. At the other end stood a man leaning against the rail, his eyes fixed on the water. "Crossing?" the man asked without looking up. "Yes," Liar said, adjusting the strap of his pack. The man tapped the railing. "Most people hurry. I stay here. Watch the water." He explained that he had once been a messenger, always moving, never pausing. Then one day, delivering a letter to a remote farm, he stopped on this bridge and realized he'd never really seen the places he passed through. "I kept thinking life was at the other end of the road. But sometimes, it's right where your feet are." They stood together in silence, the river's voice filling the air. Before Liar left, the man gave him a small, smooth stone from the railing. "The river shaped it," he said. "It took years. Maybe you'll remember that not all changes can be hurried." The climb grew steeper after the bridge. By late afternoon, clouds gathered low, wrapping the path in cold mist. Liar's breath came in short bursts, and his legs ached. Just as he was about to stop, he saw a flicker of light ahead, a lantern hanging outside a wooden shelter. Inside, a fire burned low. An elderly woman sat near it, stirring a pot of soup. She motioned for him to sit. "You're nearly there," she said, reading the weariness in his face. Over the meal, she told him she had lived here most of her life, watching travelers come and go. Some reached the summit, others turned back. "It's not weakness to stop," she said, "but if you go on, make sure you know why you're walking. Otherwise, even the dawn won't mean much." She handed him a wool scarf when he left. "For the cold above the trees. And for the times you think you've finished, but the road still has one more turn." That night, he camped higher than ever before. The air was sharp and clear, the stars so close they seemed to lean toward him. Liar laid out everything he had gathered. The fisherman's lesson about moments. The musician's reminder to carry what you love. The woman's quiet planting of trees. The merchant's cloth for the frayed road. The boy's stone towers for lost travelers. The innkeeper's key for open doors. The old man's drawing to see what's before you. The bridge watcher's stone for slow change. The mountain woman's scarf for unseen turns. They weren't just gifts, they were parts of a map that had no lines, only meanings. And somewhere in the weaving of these stories, he realized, was the dawn he had been seeking all along. Morning came like a hush before a song. Frost veined the stones, and the slope above Liar lifted into a greenish sky. He warmed his hands with his breath, tightened the scarf the mountain woman had given him, and started the last ascent. The path was stitched into the mountainside, narrow and honest. It did not pretend to be easier than it was. He did not rush. Instead of the summit, he thought of the places that had carried him here. The pier where a fisherman measured days by quiet mornings, the doorway where a musician played without strings and proved that love can outlive its instrument, the rain shelter where saplings waited for someone else's shade, the bright wagon where a merchant traded trinkets for courage, the pass where a boy stacked markers for people he would never meet, the inn with empty rooms kept ready, the stream that taught him to see with another's hand, the bridge where a messenger learned to stop. The question that had shadowed every mile rose again. Why am I walking? He answered it now, without words, because moving through the world was a way to move through himself, because the dawn he sought had been glimmering at the edges of every story. Snow lay in shallow seams, softening rock. A shoulder of the mountain curved like a folded wing. When he rounded it, the wind fell away, and he found a small hollow facing east. The horizon was a narrow dark line above a sea of cloud. He set a few tokens on the ground, not as trophies but as invitations: the faded cloth from the wagon, the musician's scrap with its uneven ink, carry what you love, even when it changes shape, the brass key from the inn, the sketch of the stream, the smooth stone from the bridge. He added one more, the journal he had been filling. On a blank page he wrote, "The first light is made of other people's lanterns." He closed the book and waited. The sky brightened almost imperceptibly, a silver breath drawn through the world. Liar listened to the quiet. He thought of the empty rooms and realized that waiting is not absence, it is space made ready. He thought of the tree planter and understood that the future is tended by today's hands. He thought of the bridge watcher and felt the patience of water shaping stone. A sliver of sun lifted at the cloud's rim. It was not sudden, not grand. It was steady. Light touched the stones before him, warmed his fingers, climbed the face of the mountain in careful steps. In that small, unfolding moment, something inside him arranged itself as clearly as a constellation. It was not an answer with a sentence. It was a pattern. Every person had given him a way of seeing: count mornings, not medals; carry love past its shape; plant for strangers; leave signs behind; keep a door open; borrow another's eyes; trust slow change; ask why before the hard path. All of it, together, made the summit. The mountain had been a direction. The meaning was the road. He opened the journal again and wrote, "Dawn is not a place I reached, but a way I learned to walk." The wind shifted, bringing the smell of pine from lower slopes and a faint thread of water. The world felt near, like a friend sitting beside him. He stayed until the sun stood free of the clouds and the frost loosened its hold on the stones. Then he gathered the tokens. Some he kept, some he left. He tucked the musician's line back into the journal. It had completed its circle. He tied the faded cloth to a cairn at the hollow's edge, letting it flicker in the new breeze, a small flag for anyone who might find this place and wonder if they were late. He slid the brass key beneath a flat stone by the path, a reminder that there will always be rooms to ready. The drawing of the stream he pressed between early pages of his book, so the first thing future him would see upon opening would be motion made by patient hands. The smooth stone he kept in his pocket, its weight a quiet yes to slow change. On the way down, the mountain looked different, though it had not changed. People were dots on far trails, moving like notes in a score. Liar passed two hikers who asked how far the summit was. He told them the truth: nearer than it seems if you count the steps for what they are. They smiled, and one of them asked if the dawn was worth it. He thought of the easy answers: yes, of course, always, and chose a different one. "It's worth it before you arrive," he said, "if you let it be." They thanked him and went on. The path widened, the air warmed. At the line where trees began again, he paused and listened to their old, murmuring conversation. He thought of the woman planting in the rain and felt a steady gratitude for people who do work the future will one day call obvious. By late afternoon he reached a meadow where a single house stood, thin smoke lifting from its chimney. The door was open. A table had been set outside with a pitcher of water and a note, "For travelers." Liar smiled and poured a cup. The water tasted like stone and light. He sat and opened his journal once more. On the final page he wrote a letter he would never send, addressed to his father. "You were right about the mountain. You were also right about the more than sunrise thing. I'll come home by a longer road. There are markers to build, rooms to ready, fields to help plant. I have learned the shape of my dawn. It fits in the pockets of ordinary days." He closed the book. The far ridges were catching the gold of evening. Somewhere a bell rang, perhaps for dinner, perhaps for memory. Liar rose, shouldered his pack, and turned toward the road that led onward, not back. He did not hurry. He had time. As he walked, the first star appeared, not a finale, but a companion. The path bent left, then right, then straightened, opening toward distances that were no longer a mystery but an invitation. The last light brushed his hands. He lifted them and let it pass through. And the world, answering softly, began again.